You're listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. The wind didn't just blow through the northern reaches that night, it screamed. It screamed like a dying thing, tearing through the pines and whipping the torches into frantic, dancing snakes of light. And in the heart of that frozen shriek, they dragged her. Elara Vance. Her name was a whisper lost to the storm, just as she was. The thin shift they'd given her was no more than a ghost of fabric, plastered to her skin by the biting cold and her own terrified sweat. The Silver Fang Pack believed in old magic, in brutal bargains. Their game had vanished, their children's cries were weak, and the ancient curse of the woods demanded a price. An innocent soul. And who was more innocent, more expendable than the orphan girl who mended their clothes and ate their scraps? The stone of atonement awaited her in the clearing, a slab of granite stained with the rust-colored memories of 100 forgotten tragedies. Alpha Cedric Blackwood stood beside it, a mountain of fur and arrogance. His eyes, the color of frozen slate, held no remorse, only a hungry, desperate relief. This would fix everything. Her death would buy their life. Please, Alpha Cedric, I beg you. Alara's voice was raw, shredded from hours of pleading in the dark. I've been loyal, I've done nothing wrong. Her words were swallowed by the wind. The pack surrounded her, a circle of grim faces illuminated by the firelight. Mrs. Fern, the weaver whose shawls Alara had delivered, Old Man Holt, the carpenter whose tools she'd sorted. They all looked away. It wasn't them. It would never be them. It was her. Beta Kale, a man with hands that had once handed her a bread roll when she was starving, now grabbed her wrists. His grip was iron, impersonal. He didn't look at her face as he slammed her hands against the stone's freezing surface. The metallic clink-clank of the iron shackles locking was the loudest sound in the world. "Kale, you know me," she whispered, a tear tracing a hot path down her cheek only to freeze instantly. "This isn't right. The stories are just to scare pups. There is no cursed wolf." He finally met her eyes, and his were empty, hollow. "The pack is dying, Alara. The rivers are ice, the deer are gone. The beast of the black woods demands a tribute. It's you or my own sister." He stepped back, merging with the shadowy crowd. Alpha Cedric raised his arms, his voice a booming roll of thunder meant to drown out doubt. "Tonight, we cleanse our land. We offer this girl, Elara Vance, to the spirit of the deep wood. May her lifeblood wash away our misfortune. May the shadow wolf take his due and leave us in peace." The pack echoed him, a low, chanting growl. "Take her, take her, take her." Elara pulled against the chains until her wrists bled, the warm blood a shocking contrast to the cold stone. She searched the faces one last time and found only a wall of collective will to survive. Her will meant nothing. "Leave her," Cedric commanded. The torches turned away. One by one, the lights retreated, snaking back toward the warm, glowing windows of the distant village. The last to leave was Celeste, Cedric's daughter, beautiful, sharp, and cruel as broken glass. She sauntered to the stone, a smirk playing on her perfect lips. She leaned in, her breath a foul warmth in Alara's ear. "I hope he's hungry," Celeste hissed, her voice dripping with venomous glee. "I hope he starts with your eyes while you can still see." With a laugh that cracked like ice, she was gone. Then there was only silence. A deep, thick, consuming silence broken by the sob Alara could no longer hold back. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. The cold was no longer just cold. It was a presence, seeping into her bones, slowing her heart, inviting her to sleep. She tried to call her wolf, but the connection was a faint, starved flicker, dampened by the herbs they'd forced into her tea. She was human. She was prey. Time became a blur of shivers and fading hope. Then, a new sound, not the wind, A snap, a heavy, deliberate crunch of snow from the impenetrable black wall of the forbidden forest. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a frantic bird. She stared into the darkness until her eyes burned. And then two lights appeared, floating in the void, not yellow like a normal wolf, but a luminous electric violet. They pulsed with a slow, rhythmic power like a heartbeat made of lightning. A low growl vibrated up through the stone into her very teeth. It wasn't an animal sound. It was the sound of the earth itself, angry and awake. This was it, the monster, the end. Please, she whimpered, squeezing her eyes shut. Please make it quick. The scent of pine and frost was overwhelmed by something else, something wild, ancient, and terrifyingly alive. A hot gust of air hit her neck. She felt the brush of something coarse and wet against her cheek. She flinched, waiting for the tear of fangs. Instead, she heard a different sound, a low, curious woof, then a sound that made her eyes fly open. The sickening, wet crack-pop crunch of bones rearranging, the sound of a shift. The giant wolf was gone. Standing before her, naked and steaming in the glacial air, was a man. He was tall, powerfully built, etched with muscle and scars that told silent stories of violence. His hair was long, black as the space between stars, and his eyes, those impossible violet eyes, were fixed on her. But not with hunger, with a blazing, focused intensity. He stepped forward. Alara tried to shrink back, but the stone held her fast. He reached out, and his warm fingers brushed the frozen iron shackle on her wrist. He examined it, then her face, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was a rough melody, deep and unused, like stones grinding in a riverbed. Who chains a living heart to a dead stone? Ilara could only stare, her mind blank with terror and shock. He leaned closer, the heat of him a brand in the frozen air. Speak. Who offers a soul to a ghost? The question, so strange, so specific, unlocked her voice. The Silver Fang Pack, Alpha Cedric. He said you were the Shadow Wolf, the curse. My life for theirs. For a fraction of a second, the violet in his eyes flared into an inferno. A name left his lips, not a spoken word, but a raw, guttural promise of vengeance. Cedric, then his hands were on the chains. He didn't search for a key. He wrapped his fingers around the thick iron links. The muscles in his arms and shoulders corded, shifting like mountains. With a roar that shook snow from the trees, he pulled. Snap! The chain shattered as if it were made of dry clay. Ilara fell forward, her legs numb. He caught her before she hit the snow, scooping her effortlessly into arms that radiated a furnace's heat. She gasped at the sudden warmth, her body convulsing with violent shivers. He looked down at her, his gaze softening just a fraction. I am no curse, little one, he rumbled, turning to face the vast, dark forest. But Cedric has just made a fatal error. He thought he was feeding a beast a meal. He began to walk, carrying her away from the stone, away from the village, into the heart of the black woods. Ilara's consciousness was fading, pulled under by warmth and exhaustion. What? She slurred. What did he give you? The man looked down, his violet eyes glowing in the dark like captured stars. A witness, he said, and the forest swallowed them whole. Consciousness returned slowly, like a fog lifting from a still lake. Ilara's first sensation was warmth. Glorious, all-encompassing warmth. It seeped into her frozen marrow, coaxing life back into her limbs. The second sensation was smell, cedar smoke, roasting meat, and something else, something clean and wild, like a storm on a pine-covered mountain. Her eyes fluttered open. She wasn't in a cave. She wasn't in a den of bones. She was in a bed, a massive four-poster bed heaped with the softest, thickest furs she had ever felt. She pushed herself up slowly, her hands trembling against the rich pelts. Panic tried to rise, the memory of chains, of snow, of violet eyes, but it was muted by the sheer, impossible comfort of her surroundings. She was in a lodge. The word cabin was too small for this place. It was built from enormous, ancient logs, with a vaulted ceiling where shadows danced in the rafters. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth so large she could have stood inside it. A fire roared there, the source of the blessed heat, but this was no savage's hideout. Books lined rough-hewn shelves. Maps were pinned to the walls, marked with strange symbols. Weapons, axes, swords, bows of elegant, deadly craftsmanship, hung with a quiet dignity. This was the home of a warrior, a king in exile. You're awake. She jumped, the furs pooling around her. He stood by the fireplace, having moved without a sound. The man, the wolf. He was dressed now in simple, dark clothes, a thermal shirt that strained over the width of his shoulders, trousers tucked into heavy boots. He held a wooden bowl, steam curling from its contents. He looked less like a mythical beast and more like a mountain carved into human form, but those eyes, those luminous violet eyes, were unchanged. He approached, his movements controlled and silent. Drink, he said, his voice that same low rumble, but softer now. Broth. Your body was fighting the cold for too long. Another hour on that stone, and your heart would have surrendered. Elara took the bowl with both hands, the warmth seeping into her aching fingers. She stared at the rich liquid, then back at him, confusion warring with a dawning, impossible hope. You didn't kill me. He let out a short, sharp sound, almost a laugh but devoid of humor. It was the sound of dry leaves scraping stone. I am not a monster, Elara Vance, despite the pretty stories Cedric tells his flock. He pulled a chair closer and sat, watching her with an unnerving, focused stillness. My name is Thorn. Thorn, a name of protection and pain, it suited him. I'm Elara, she whispered automatically, then took a sip. The flavor was incredible: venison, herbs, root vegetables, a symphony of sustenance. It was the first real meal she'd had in years. The pack leftovers had never tasted like this. I know, Thorn said. You spoke in your sleep. You spoke of many things: injustice, fear, hunger. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, the intensity in his gaze pinning her in place. Tell me, Elara, why did Cedric truly send you? The failing crops are a lie. The land sickens because the leadership is rotten, not cursed. The directness of the question, the assumption of her understanding, broke through her shock. She lowered the bowl. He said, the pack's strength fades. No healthy pups in 2 winters. He said the spirit of the North, you, had poisoned our bloodline, that only a pure sacrifice would break it. Thorn threw his head back and laughed. It was a dark, bitter sound that echoed in the high ceiling. I poison nothing. The moon goddess turns her face from Silver Fang because a thief sits on the Alpha's throne. A murderer decorates himself with stolen power. The vehemence in his voice was a physical force. Elara flinched. He stood abruptly and strode to the far wall, yanking aside a heavy, woven tapestry. Beneath it was a portrait, dusty and faded, but the image was clear. A younger, unscarred Thorn, his bearing regal and proud, wore the obsidian crescent, the alpha medallion of Silver Fang. And standing just behind his shoulder with a respectful bow was a younger, smiling Cedric Blackwood. Elara's breath hitched. 10 years? Thorn's voice was a low, dangerous thunder. I was the alpha of Silver Fang. We were the pride of the territories. Cedric was my beta. My brother in all but blood. He traced the painted face of the man who had betrayed him. My father, the true king, had just passed. The ascension ceremony was to be my coronation. Cedric brought me a chalice of spiced wine, a toast to the new era. He turned to her, and the raw pain in his violet eyes was more terrifying than any beast's glare. It was laced with wolf's bane and ground silver. It did not kill me. It trapped me. It shattered my connection to my wolf to the pack link. I was paralyzed, screaming in silent agony as my own mind turned against me. And then, he told them I had gone mad, that the Blackwood madness had claimed me, that I slaughtered my own counsel in a frenzy. The night of howling tears, Alara whispered, the old, sad story every pack child was told. The story of the good Alpha Cedric who had to put down his rabid king to save them all. Lies! Thorn roared and the fire flared as if in response. He slaughtered the council, those loyal to me. He dragged my helpless body to the gorge of whispers and threw me to the rocks below. He told the pack the demon had taken me, and he, the noble Beta, had no choice but to lead. Ilara's mind reeled. Everything, every lesson, every history was poison. Cedric wasn't the savior, he was the infection. But, she stammered, trying to piece it together, that was 10 years ago. You're strong now. I saw your wolf. You could tear through the village gates. Why stay hidden? Thorn walked back to her, each step measured. Because the poison did more than paralyze me, Alara, it severed my tether to the pack magic. An alpha is nothing without his pack's bond. Without it, I am a rogue in the eyes of the ancient laws. If I challenge him now, without proof, without a legitimate claim witnessed by the pack, I am just an invading wolf. He could have me killed, and the packs would call it justice. He stopped at the foot of the bed, the air crackling around him. I needed an opening. I needed him to make a mistake so profound, the magic itself would recognize my right. He took one final step, his gaze holding hers with the weight of destiny. And Cedric just made it. He performed a ritual of sacrifice. He offered a member of his own pack to the spirit of the woods. A slow, predatory smile touched Thorn's lips. By that ancient right, Alara, your bond to Silver Fang is severed. You belong to the forest now, to the spirit he invoked. He knelt beside the bed, bringing his face level with hers. His voice dropped to a whisper that vibrated in her soul. Technically, by his own actions, you are now my pack, my first and only member in 10 long years. Alara's heart stuttered, his pack. Yes, Thorn vowed, his eyes glowing. And through you, I can feel it, a thread. A single, fragile thread back to the land, to the magic. He didn't send me a sacrifice. He sent me a key. He stood and offered her his hand. It was broad, scarred, and looked capable of crushing stone. I am going to take back my throne, Alara. I am going to make Cedric pay for every drop of blood he spilled. But I cannot do it from the outside. I need someone who knows the inside. Someone they will never suspect, until it is far, far too late. He paused, the silence swelling with the weight of the question hanging between them. Will you help me break him? Will you stand, as the Queen Silver Fang was always meant to have? Ilara looked from his hand to his eyes. She saw no deception, only a burning truth and a tempered, ferocious hope. She thought of Celeste's cruel smirk, of Kale's empty eyes, of the cold, approving nods of the pack as she was led to her death. They had discarded her like rubbish. They had offered her to the wolf. A new feeling ignited in her chest, hot and bright and fierce. It wasn't just anger, it was purpose. If they wanted her to be wolf food, she would not be the meat, she would be the fangs. Ilara reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip closed around hers, warm, solid, and electric, a promise sealed. When do we begin? She asked, her voice no longer a whisper, but a clear, steady sound. Thorn's smile was a flash of white in the dim light, a glimpse of the king he was. First, he said, you heal. Then I teach you how to hunt, because when we return to Silver Fang, Alara, we will not be knocking on the door. 3 weeks vanished in a blur of pain, sweat, and shocking transformation. To the Silver Fang pack, Alara Vance was a ghost, a grim story told to keep pups in line. In the heart of Thorn's mountain fortress, she was being remade. Every dawn arrived with a bite of frost and Thorn's quiet, commanding presence at her door. He was not a gentle teacher. He was a force of nature, relentless and uncompromising. He did not see a fragile, broken girl. He saw raw material, a blade waiting to be tempered. The training ground was a clearing behind the lodge, a ring of ancient pines standing as silent witnesses. On the first morning, Elira stood shivering in borrowed clothes, her breath pluming in the air. "Show me your stance," Thorn had ordered, his arms crossed. She tried, pulling from hazy memories of pack enforcers at practice. He'd circled her once, a predator assessing prey, and with a single, swift tap of his foot against her ankle, she'd crumpled into the snow. "Again," was all he said. No sympathy, only expectation. Day after day, it was the same. Forms, strikes, blocks, falls. He moved with a liquid, terrifying grace that defied his size, making her feel clumsy and slow. Her muscles screamed in protest, then burned, then slowly began to harden. The meager strength she'd had from a life of labor was being stripped away and replaced with something lean, disciplined, and powerful. One particularly harsh morning, after he'd disarmed her for the 10th time with a simple twist of his wrist, she lay panting in the snow, frustration boiling over into tears she refused to shed. "I can't," she gasped, the cold searing her lungs. "I'm not like you, Thorn. I'm an omega, a nobody. I can't even call my wolf. I'm useless for this." He went very still. Then he walked over, his shadow falling across her. He didn't offer a hand. Instead, he crouched, his violet eyes boring into hers. "You are not an omega," he stated, his voice flat and final, leaving no room for argument. "Do you know why you couldn't shift, truly?" She looked away, shame heating her cheeks. "Because I'm weak." No, the word was a crack of a whip. He reached out and gripped her chin, not gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Because you were starved, in body and in spirit. Malnutrition cages the wolf. Oppression silences its howl. But look at you now, Alara, look." Held by his gaze, she did. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out, softened by regular, hearty meals. Her arms, once thin and wiry, now held the subtle definition of toned muscle. The perpetual chill was gone from her skin, replaced by a healthy glow. She felt solid. "Your wolf is not dead," Thorn murmured, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw, a shock of contact that sent a jolt through her. "She is waking. I can scent her. She smells like frost-kissed juniper and dawn after a storm." Her breath caught. Only a fated mate could scent the unique essence of another's wolf before its first shift. The unspoken truth hung between them, vast and terrifying. She searched his face. "Thorn, why are you doing all this? You could have used me as your witness and then gathered your strength alone. You don't need a trained, whatever I am." He released her and stood, turning to look at the towering forest around them. The silence stretched. "A king who stands alone is just a man with a crown," he said finally, his voice low. "He is a target. A king with a queen who can stand beside him, that is a dynasty, that is a future." He turned back, his expression unreadable. "And because when I look at you, I do not see a victim. I see the ember that Cedric tried to smother. I see a fire waiting for air." He gestured for her to rise. "Now, again, but this time don't strike with your arm, strike with your anger. The anger at the chains. The hunger in your belly they ignored. The betrayal in Kale's eyes. Call it forward. Let it fuel you." Ilara climbed to her feet, her legs trembling not from fatigue, but from a surging, newfound resolve. She closed her eyes. She didn't think of forms or techniques. She thought of Celeste's laugh by the stone. She thought of the weight of the shackles. She thought of being nothing of value. A heat ignited in her core. not the fleeting warmth of embarrassment, but a deep, molten coil of fury. It spread through her veins, a sweet and terrifying power. She felt a prickling under her skin, a pressure in her bones. That's it, Thorn urged, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. That's her. Don't fear her. Release her. With a cry that started human and twisted into something wild and echoing, Alara let go. The shift was not the agonizing process she'd heard described. It was a cascade, an explosion of sensation, stretching, strengthening, becoming. She fell to all fours, the world tilting and sharpening. Sounds amplified, the rustle of a mouse under the snow, the distant rush of a hidden creek. Colors grew vivid, the snow not just white, but a tapestry of blues and purples. She looked down. Her paws were not gray, nor brown, nor black. They were a pure, radiant, blinding white, like sun on fresh snow, like the heart of a diamond. Awe silenced the clearing. She lifted her head and saw Thorn. The Alpha King was staring at her, his formidable composure shattered. His lips were parted, his violet eyes wide with something akin to reverence. He took a slow step forward, then another. A white wolf, he breathed, the words a prayer. The legends, they are true, the bringer of justice. The moon goddess's own blade. And then, to her utter shock, Thorn, the fearsome, scarred king, bowed his head. A deep, respectful nod from one alpha to another of rare and sacred standing. In her mind, a new sensation blossomed. A connection, not of sound, but of pure essence. His voice, but not with her ears. Ilara, you are magnificent. The mind link, it felt like coming home. A joy pure and feral burst inside her. She yipped, a playful sound, and lunged, not to attack, but to play. She barreled into him, pushing his solid form off balance into the deep snow. A rumble started in his chest, erupting into a full, rich laugh, a sound of unbridled, surprised happiness. In a flash of dark light, his own shift took him. The massive black wolf emerged, twice her size, but suddenly agile with delight. They tumbled together, a whirlwind of black and white against the pristine landscape, a dance of shadows and light as old as the mountains themselves. When they finally shifted back, breathless and sprawled in the snow, the sun was high. Thorn wrapped a heavy fur around them both as they sat against a broad tree trunk. Ilara leaned into his side, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her shoulder. She had never felt so safe, so right. You knew, she whispered into the quiet, the truth settling in her soul. You knew I was yours. Thorn's arm tightened around her. I sensed it the moment I caught your scent on the wind at the stone. A pull I had not felt in a lifetime, but I could not claim you then, not when you were broken. It would not have been a bond, it would have been a cage. He pressed his lips to her hair, a gesture of startling tenderness. I needed you to find your own strength first, to choose this path with your eyes open. He pulled back to look at her, his gaze fierce with pride. And now you are a storm given form, Alara, and I am honored to stand in your reign. Alara looked at her human hand, then clenched it into a fist. She felt the wolf's power humming just beneath her skin, a wellspring of courage and fury. She looked up at Thorn, her king, her mate. Then let's go, she said, her voice clear as crystal in the cold air. Let's go take our kingdom back. The border of Silver Fang territory wasn't a clean line on a map, it was a feeling. A creeping dread in the gut of any wolf who strayed too far, reinforced by patrols and the silent threat of Cedric's justice. Thorn knew every inch of it, a ghost haunting the edges of his own stolen kingdom. Tonight, they weren't ghosts. They were hunters. Stay low, Thorn's voice was a vibration in the gathering twilight, felt more than heard. And silent, your thoughts are loud to me now. Keep them focused, like a blade. Ilara nodded, her breath steadying. Dressed in the dark, practical gear Thorn had scavenged over his exile, She felt like a different person, not the sacrificial lamb, not even the trainee. She felt like a shadow with purpose. They lay on a rocky outcrop overlooking the main supply road, a thin, muddy scar through the snow-dusted pines. A low rumble echoed in the distance. "That's the truck," Alara whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. "Comes every Tuesday, carries the essentials from the southern traders." She squinted. But if the pack is struggling like Cedric claims, it should be nearly empty. Thorn peered through a pair of worn but powerful binoculars. His body went still. "It's not empty," he murmured, a new edge in his tone. "Look at the suspension. It's riding heavy, strained." "That's not food or medicine." "Weapons?" Alara thought directly to him, testing the new, intimate channel of their link. "Or something he values more than his pack's loyalty." Thorn thought back, his mental voice a grim rumble. They moved. Thorn was a cascade of silent motion down the steep slope. Elira followed, her movements less fluid but just as quiet, her senses stretched to their limit. The crunch of a pine needle under her own boot was a thunderclap in her awareness. They reached the road's edge as the lumbering truck rounded the bend, its headlights cutting twin swathes through the gloom. Thorn didn't use magic or monstrous strength. He used the land. With a powerful shove, he sent a carefully placed, frost-heaved boulder tumbling down the bank. It landed with a ground-shaking thud directly in the truck's path. The brakes screamed. The vehicle skidded violently on a patch of black ice, coming to a shuddering halt just inches from the rock. The driver's door flew open. "Who's the idiot who didn't secure the load?" A familiar voice bellowed. It was Rurk, a hulking enforcer with a mean streak as wide as his shoulders. The passenger, a wiry man named Silas, jumped out beside him, scanning the woods nervously. "Clear the road now." Rurk shouted into the trees, his hand dropping to the stun baton at his belt. Thorn stepped from the shadows. He didn't shift, he didn't roar. He simply walked into the pool of the truck's headlights, and the sheer, concentrated aura of alpha that rolled off him made the air itself thicken. Silas took a step back, whimpering. Rurk's bravado faltered, his eyes widening. "Who? What are you?" "This is Silver Fang territory." "Identify yourself?" "The toll has changed," Thorn said, his voice a flat, cold statement. He kept walking. Rurk panicked. He yanked the stun baton free, its tip crackling with blue energy, a human weapon forbidden in traditional challenges. He lunged. Thorn moved like striking lightning. He sidestepped the wild thrust, his own hand shooting out to grip Rurk's wrist. A twist, a sickening pop, and a roar of pain as the baton fell. A follow-up knee to the gut folded the large man in half, and a sharp, precise chop to the neck dropped him into the snow, unconscious. Silas fumbled for a pistol at his waist. Before his fingers could close on the grip, a white blur shot from the opposite tree line. Elira, in human form, slammed into him, using her momentum to drive him hard against the truck's cold metal side. The air left his lungs in a whoosh. She drove her knee up and he crumpled, gasping. She stood over him, her boot pinning his wrist to the frozen ground. "Hello, Silas," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "Remember me? You used to accidentally trip me when I carried the laundry." Silas's eyes bulged in the headlight's glare. His face went from red to shade white. "Vivance, but you're the beast. It ate you." "The beast has better manners than you," she said, applying a little more pressure. He cried out. Thorn was already at the back of the truck, ripping the sealed cargo door open with a screech of protesting metal. He disappeared inside for a moment. The silence from within was more ominous than any shout. "Elira, come here." She gave Silas one last warning look before joining Thorn. In the dim glow of a single cargo light, He stood holding a sheaf of papers. His expression was no longer that of a tactical hunter. It was the face of a man witnessing a profound, personal desecration. A storm was brewing behind his violet eyes, dark and deadly. "What is it?" she asked, her voice small in the enclosed space. "He's not just failing the pack, Alara," Thorne said, his voice dangerously quiet. He held up a document. The header read, Crimson Peak Extraction CORP. Final purchase agreement. He's selling it piece by piece. Alara took the papers, her eyes scanning. Legal jargon, maps with areas marked in red. And then she saw it, the highlighted parcel of land. Her blood ran cold. The ancestral glade, the burial grounds. "He's selling the burial grounds?" "For lithium," Thorne snarled, crumpling the edge of the paper in his fist. "He's going to let humans with machines dig up our fathers and mothers, our heroes, to power their little devices." The rage in him was a palpable heat. He's severing the pack's past to fund his own worthless future. Alara felt a nausea that had nothing to do with the truck's motion. The glade was sacred. It was where the pack's spirit lived, where the connection to the moon goddess was strongest. To violate it was beyond betrayal, it was spiritual suicide. "Look at the date," Thorne pointed a trembling finger to the bottom of the page. "The final signing ceremony, the public announcement, it's set for the winter solstice gala." The gala, the biggest night of the Silver Fang year. When allies were courted, treaties were toasted, and Cedric's power was displayed like a glittering trophy. "He's going to do it in front of everyone," Alara realized, horror dawning. "He's going to make them all complicit. He'll have the backing of the other alphas by making it a progressive economic deal." "Perfect," Thorne whispered. The word was a promise of vengeance. He looked at her, and the terrifying grin that spread across his face held no humor, only lethal intent. "It's perfect, Alara. Perfect." "He's going to destroy us in 2 days." "No," Thorne corrected, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "In 2 days, Cedric is going to assemble the entire northern hierarchy in one room and provide us with the perfect audience for his downfall." He turned his gaze to Silas, who was trying to crawl away in the snow. Thorne strode over and hauled him up by his collar. "Listen, Worm, you are going to drive this truck back to the pack house. You will tell Cedric you hit a patch of ice, damaged the axle, and had to make repairs. If you breathe a word of what happened here, if you even think about describing us, I will find you. I will find every person you have ever loved. And you will watch as the shadows claim them, one by one. Do you understand the silence I require?" Silas nodded so vigorously his teeth chattered. Thorne dropped him. "Good." He turned to Alara, his eyes alight with a strategic fire. "Grab the suits from the crate in the back, the expensive ones meant for his lackeys to wear." Alara retrieved 2 garments bags, finding fine, tailored clothing inside. She looked at Thorne, a question in her eyes. He took the bags, his expression shifting to one of dark royalty. "It seems, my queen," he said, the title now a plan, not just an endearment, "we are going to a party." As they melted back into the forest, leaving the broken men and the damning evidence behind, Alara's heart hammered not with fear, but with a fierce, rising anticipation. The hunt was no longer in the woods, it was in a ballroom. "Thorne," she asked as they climbed the ridge, the pack house lights twinkling mockingly in the valley below. "How do we just walk in? They'll recognize us the moment we step through the door." Thorne stopped and turned to her. In the moonlight, his scarred face was all stark angles and resolve. He cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "They will see only what they expect to see. Arrogant investors, outsiders." He leaned close, his breath warm against her lips. "And by the time they realize their mistake, my queen, we will already be holding the knife to his throat. The kiss he pressed to her forehead was a seal, a promise, the final calm before the storm. The Silver Fang pack house, a fortress of stern gray stone and harsh angles, had been transformed. It was a brittle, beautiful lie. Thousands of twinkling fairy lights were strung through the skeletal winter oaks, casting dancing, deceptive shadows. The air, usually sharp with pine and wood smoke, was thick with the cloying scent of imported flowers and expensive perfume. Laughter rang out, bright, hollow, and entirely for show. A sleek, vintage black car, all polished menace, glided to a stop at the foot of the grand staircase. It stood out among the flashy modern vehicles like a wolf among poodles. The door opened, and a booted foot hit the gravel. Kaelan Thorne emerged. The gasps were instantaneous, a ripple through the Omega servants lining the steps. He was not just handsome, he was formidable elegance personified. A suit of charcoal wool, cut with severe precision, sheathed his powerful frame. His long, dark hair was swept back, revealing the stark, handsome planes of his face and that jagged, silver scar, a mark of history no polish could erase. But it was his eyes, visible even in the evening gloom, that stole breath. They glowed with a subdued, stormy violet light, promising quiet thunder. He turned, extending a gloved hand into the car's interior. My lady. A hand, sheathed in delicate ivory silk, settled into his. Then Lyra stepped out. If Kaelan drew gasps, Lyra wrought a profound, ringing silence. Her gown was the color of moonlit mercury, a cascade of liquid silver that moved with her like a second skin, whispering of hidden strength. Her pale gold hair, once lank and tied back, was a glorious mane swept up in an intricate twist, studded with tiny diamonds that caught the light like captive stars. A sleek silver mask, patterned like frost, covered the upper half of her face. But nothing could mask the new, unwavering lift of her chin, the regal set of her shoulders. She was no longer the girl from the scullery. She was a vision from an old, forgotten legend. Kaelan's voice brushed her mind, a private anchor in the sea of stairs. Breathe, Lyra. You are not walking into their den, they are standing in your throne room. I remember, she thought back, her mental voice steady. She felt her white wolf stir, a calming, powerful presence beneath her skin. They ascended the stairs, an unhurried, deliberate climb. At the massive oak doors, standing like a sentinel in an ill-fitting tuxedo, was Beta Kale. His eyes darted over Kaelan, lingering on the sheer, intimidating scale of him. Names? Kale asked, his voice trying for authority but landing on unease. Lord Valerius, Kaelan stated, his tone bored, dripping with the indifference of old money. And Lady Selene. He plucked the names from the air, from the moon and the stars themselves. Kale's pen hovered. He looked at Lyra, a flicker of confused recognition crossing his features before being buried under impossibility. Lady Selene could not be Lyra Vance. It was a trick of the light, the mask, the sheer audacity of the idea. He sniffed subtly. All he caught was a complex, elegant scent of night-blooming jasmine and cold stone, a perfume Kaelan had procured to cloak their true nature. I don't see you on the primary list, Kale stammered. Kaelan didn't even look at him. He looked through him. Check the investor registry. Alpha Cedric is expecting our final commitment tonight. The implication was clear. We are the money, you are the help. Flustered, Kale flipped the page on his clipboard. There, added in fresh ink by their own hand from the stolen documents, were the names. His shoulders slumped in defeated obedience. My apologies, Lord Valerius, Lady Selene, please proceed. They swept past him into the roaring heart of the gala. The ballroom was a symphony of false opulence. Crystal glittered, champagne flowed, and the elite of the shifter world preened and politicked. utterly blind to the rot festering in their midst. On a raised dais at the far end, seated on a throne like chair that was a gross parody of the simple Alpha's seat of old, sat Cedric Blackwood. He looked prosperous, bloated on fine wine and stolen power. Beside him, dripping in gems that glinted with a cold, familiar fire, sat Celeste. Lyra's breath hitched. Kaelan, the necklace, the sunstone pendant, it was your mother S. Kaelan's hand on her arm tightened, a fractional spike of pure, icy rage transmitted through their link. It will be returned, tonight. They moved like sharks through a shallow reef, smooth, purposeful, unnoticed until they wished to be seen. As they neared the bar, a shrill, familiar laugh cut through the din. And Daddy says the northern investors are practically begging to give us capital. Finally, I can winter in the Sun Isles like a proper alpha's daughter should. Celeste, holding court with a flock of sycophants. One of the girls leaned in, whispering loudly. Is it true, Celeste, about the sacrifice? People say the woods have been silent since. Celeste waved a dismissive hand, the stolen sunstone catching the light. That pathetic little scrub, please. The shadow wolf probably took one bite and spat her out. She was always tasteless. She laughed again, the sound like shattering glass. Good riddance. She never did get the stains out of my velvet cloaks. Lyra's fingers clenched around the stem of a glass she hadn't even picked up. The crystal vibrated, threatening to crack. Steady, my heart, Kaelan's voice was a calming growl in her mind. Let her dig. The deeper the hole, the harder the fall. Perhaps sensing the weight of a gaze, Celeste turned. Her eyes, sharp and vain, swept over Kaelan, widening with avaricious interest. Then they slid to Lyra. The interest curdled into instant, venomous jealousy. Who was this masked woman, standing beside such a man, in a gown that outshone her own? She sauntered over, her entourage trailing like ugly ducklings. Well, hello, you're new? I don't believe we've been introduced. Her tone was sweet poison. I'm Celeste Blackwood. Alpha Cedric is my father. And you are? Kaelan turned his head slowly, as if noticing a mildly interesting insect. He looked down his nose at her, his violet eyes cold. We are the reason your champagne fountain flows, child. Run along back to your daddy. The adults are talking. Celeste's face flushed a mottled red. The insult, the dismissal, was a public slap. How dare you? I am the Alpha's heir. I could have you thrown out with the rest of the garbage. You could try, Lyra said. Her voice, it was different, lower. Resonant with an alpha timbre that should not have been there. It carried, silencing the chatter around them. Celeste's head snapped toward her. The jealousy evaporated, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. That voice, it scratched at a buried, terrible memory. It echoed in a place of stone and snow. Her own wolf, a petty, spoiled creature, gave a terrified whimper inside her, a reaction Celeste had never felt before. Before her fury could reignite, a fanfare of trumpets sliced through the tension. The crowd hushed, turning toward the dais. Alpha Cedric stood, microphone in hand, a bloated king addressing his court. Welcome, honored allies, cherished friends. Tonight marks a new dawn for Silver Fang, a pivot from tired tradition to glorious prosperity. He gestured to a small table where two men in sharp human suits sat, contracts and pens laid out before them. Tonight, we join hands with progress. With Crimson Peak Extraction, we sign a partnership that will secure our wealth for generations. Kaelan took the untouched glass from Lyra's hand and placed it on a passing tray. It's time, he thought, his mental voice a clear, cold chime. They began to walk, not toward the crowd, but through it, directly toward the stage. The sea of people parted without understanding why, an instinctive reaction to the sheer, unleashed aura of power they now let bleed through their scent masks. It was the feeling of a storm front moving in, the pressure dropped before the hurricane. Cedric beamed, picking up a solid gold pen, poised over the document that would sell his pack's soul. And so, with pride, I sign away the shackles of the past. I object. The voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was a blade of pure sound, forged in exile and sharpened on betrayal. It pierced the room, freezing the gold pen in midair. Cedric jerked, peering into the lights. Who said that? Who dares? Kaelan stepped into the clear lane leading to the stage. He reached up, his movements deliberate, theatrical. He untied the strings of his silver mask. It fell, clattering softly on the polished floor. The reaction was not a ripple, but a quake. Elders dropped their drinks. A visiting alpha choked on his wine. Cedric's triumphant smile melted into a rictus of pure, unadulterated terror. The color drained from his face, leaving him a gaping, waxen statue. You, he croaked, the microphone amplifying his disbelief into a shaky whisper for all to hear. You're a ghost, I buried you, Kaelan smiled. It was a terrible, beautiful sight. You tried, Cedric, but you forgot one thing about true kings. He took the first step onto the dais, his violet eyes blazing like captured lightning. The very air crackled around him. We do not stay buried. The silence in the grand ballroom was no longer one of anticipation. It was the silence of a tomb. 1,000 eyes were riveted on the stage, on the ghost made flesh, on the legend stepping from the shadows into the cruel light. The opulent gala had transformed into a theater of the impossible. Kaelan stood before his stolen throne, before the man who had forged it from lies and blood. His gaze never left Cedric, who had shrunk back into his gilded chair, a pathetic king confronting the specter of his greatest sin. Cedric Blackwood. Kaelan's voice, now unleashed, was a rolling peal of judgment. It required no microphone. It resonated in the chest of every shifter present, a primal call to witness. I accuse you, before these assembled packs, before the spirits of our ancestors, I accuse you of high treason, of attempted regicide, of poisoning your alpha and usurping his throne with the blood of loyal wolves on your hands. He moved then, a predator's fluid grace, to the table where the human businessmen sat frozen. From inside his jacket, he drew the crumpled contract, slamming it down on the pristine parchment. The sound was a gunshot in the quiet. And I accuse you of this. He roared, his finger stabbing the document. The ultimate betrayal. You would sell the very ground where our forefathers sleep. You would let human machines dig up our history for pieces of silver. You are not a leader. You are a grave robber. A wave of sickened murmurs broke through the pack members. Selling hunting rights was one thing. This was sacrilege. The sacred ancestral glade was the heart of their magic, their identity. To lose it was to become ghosts themselves. Lies, Cedric shrieked, finding his voice in a desperate, shrill denial. He stumbled to his feet, pointing a trembling finger. He is a demon, a phantom wearing my brother's face. Guards, seize him, tear this impostor apart. Beta Kale, his face a mask of conflicted terror, looked from his alpha to the undeniable, powerful presence of Kaelan. Loyalty warred with a deeper, older instinct. But Cedric's command was law. With a snarl, Kale shifted, his brown wolf form erupting from the ruined tuxedo. 10 other enforcers followed suit, a wall of fur and fangs lunging for the stage. Kaelan didn't move to defend himself. He didn't shift, he simply looked at them. And then he called. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure, a wave of pure, undiluted alpha authority that exploded from him. It was the command of the land itself, the rightful king reclaiming his dominion. The rushing wolves hit the invisible wall of that command and folded. They crashed to the polished floor, whining, ears flat, bellies exposed. The compulsion was absolute, biological, undeniable. Beta Kale skidded to a halt at Kalan's boots, a low, pained whimper escaping his throat. Kalan looked down at him, not with hatred, but with a profound, weary disappointment. You always followed the loudest voice, Kale, not the truest one. Stand down. He turned his burning gaze back to Cedric, who stood alone and trembling. Your pack will not fight for you, usurper. They feel the truth in their bones. The challenge is made. The right of blood and bone. Here, now, before these witnesses. Or do you forfeit your title and show them all the coward you truly are? It was the oldest law, inviolable. Refusal meant instant shame and loss. Cedric was cornered, the eyes of the entire northern hierarchy upon him. He saw no loyalty in their faces now, only cold assessment. His reign of lies was crumbling, and violence was the only language he had left. With a roar of sheer, corner-drat desperation, Cedric tore at his fine clothes. His shift was not graceful. It was a violent, straining process, bones cracking with sickening pops, fur erupting in patchy tufts. Where Kaelan's wolf was a creature of majestic, terrifying power, Cedric S. was a reflection of the man, a large but soft, rusty brown wolf, his eyes burning with panic, not fury. Kaelan watched, his expression impassive. Then he allowed his own change. It was not a shift, it was a revelation. One moment he was a man. The next, the massive, scarred black wolf stood upon the dais, a creature of midnight and storm. He dwarfed Cedric. The sheer, awe-inspiring power of him drew a unified gasp from the crowd. This was no mere alpha. This was the shadow wolf of legend given form. Cedric lunged, driven by fear. It was a clumsy, predictable attack. Kaelan moved with effortless, lethal grace. He didn't meet the charge, he flowed around it. A massive, black paw swatted Cedric aside like a bothersome pup, sending the brown wolf yelping and tumbling across the stage, crashing into the speaker system with a shriek of feedback. This was not a fight. It was an execution of dignity. Kaelan was systematically dismantling the myth of Cedric's strength, showing the entire pack how weak, how unworthy their false leader had always been. Below the stage, chaos of a different kind brewed. Celeste, watching her father's humiliation, her future dissolving into ruin, was seized by a venomous fury. Her eyes, wild and desperate, scanned the crowd and landed on Lyra, the masked woman who had insulted her. The woman who stood calm while her world ended. This was her fault. A silver-plated dagger, a cruel trinket, was hidden in her garter. Celeste's hand closed around the hilt. With a shriek of pure malice, she broke from her stunned friends and charged, aiming the point for the spot between Lyra's shoulder blades. Die, you filthy outsider. Lyra didn't need the mind link. Her senses, honed in the mountain woods, caught the rush of air, the scent of floral perfume and murderous intent. She didn't turn, she spun. Her hand shot out, catching Celeste's wrist an inch from her back. The grip was iron, unyielding. Lyra finally turned her head, her eyes meeting Celeste S through the silver mask. Hello, Celeste, Lyra said, her voice eerily calm. She ripped her own mask away. Recognition, slow and horrifying, dawned on Celeste's face. The polished features, the defiant eyes, the girl from the scullery. The sacrifice. Why you, the scrub, it's impossible. The queen, Lyra corrected, her voice dropping to a whisper only Celeste could hear. Then she twisted. Snap. Celeste screamed as the bone in her wrist gave way, the dagger clattering to the floor. She tried to shift, to call her wolf in a final act of defiance, but Lyra's power, the new, sure power of the white wolf, smothered it. And then Lyra let go of her own human form. The transformation was blinding. A flash of pure, white light, and where the woman in silver stood, there now stood a wolf of impossible, radiant whiteness. Her fur seemed to glow from within, a creature spun from moonlight and winter's heart. A collective, reverent gasp swept the room. Visiting alphas and elders, recognizing the omen, the myth made flesh dropped to one knee without hesitation. Celeste faced not a rival but a divine rebuke. The white wolf, the moon goddess's own justice. All the malice drained from her, replaced by primal, pant-sweating terror. She collapsed, a mewling heap on the floor, baring her throat in absolute, instinctive submission to the power she had once thought she could kick. Lyra's white wolf placed a heavy, pure paw on Celeste's chest, not to crush but to claim. She leaned down, her muzzle close to Celeste's face, and released a low, vibrating growl that held the chill of the stone of atonement and the promise of judgment. Celeste's eyes rolled back and she fainted. On the stage, the final act was upon them. Cedric was beaten, bleeding from a dozen superficial wounds, his spirit broken. Kaelan's black wolf stood over him, his great jaws resting lightly on the brown wolf's exposed throat. One bite would end it. The law demanded it. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the killing snap. Kaelan shifted back. He stood over the cowering, reverted Cedric, naked and glorious, painted with the evidence of his victory. He looked at the pathetic man, then out at the silent, waiting pack, his pack. He raised his voice, the words a formal, binding decree that echoed with finality. Death is a mercy you do not deserve, traitor. You wish to sell our history? Then you shall have none. He paused, letting the sentence hang. I, Kaelan Thorn, Alpha King of Silver Fang, hereby strip Cedric Blackwood of his rank, his name, and his wolf. He is Omega. He is rogue, he is prey. He gestured to the two nearest visiting alphas who stepped forward eagerly. Take this nothing out of my sight, throw him to the borders, let the winter have him. As the weeping, broken man was dragged away into the darkness, Kaelan turned. He found Lyra, standing now in her human form amidst the kneeling crowd, her torn dress and wild hair more regal than any crown. He extended his hand, his violet eyes holding only her. Come, he said, his voice softening into a command meant solely for her. Take your place. Lyra walked forward, took his hand, and stepped onto the dais beside him. Together, the Black King and the White Queen, they faced their people. And as one, the entire assembly bowed their heads to the floor. The reign of the usurper was finished. The true Alpha had returned. And he had brought a revolution with him. The morning after the storm dawned clear and sharp. The sun over Silver Fang territory didn't just rise, it reclaimed. Its light, once swallowed by the gray gloom of Cedric's rule, now poured golden and defiant over the pack lands, glinting off frost-laden pines and the unbroken snow. The air itself tasted different, clean, charged with a brittle hope and the scent of wood smize from 100 hearths. Lyra stood at the wide window of the Alpha's study. No, their study, watching the new day take hold. She wore one of Kaelan's soft flannel shirts, the fabric smelling overwhelmingly of him, pine, leather, and that wild, electric undercurrent that was his essence. A steaming mug of strong coffee was cradled in her hands, a tiny island of warmth. The silence in the room was profound, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence after a battle, heavy with consequence and the whispers of a new beginning. The heavy oak door opened with a soft groan. Bait a Kale? No, just Kale now, was ushered in by two stern-faced warriors from the old loyalist families, men whose names Kaelan had whispered to her in the dark of the lodge. They were guards now, their loyalty unquestionable. Kale looked diminished. His fine tuxedo from the night before was torn and stained, one eye swollen shut, his posture hunched. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pallor of deep, trembling fear. He fell to his knees the moment his eyes found Lyra. Lyra, please, he begged, his voice cracking on the word. You have to understand Cedric. He threatened my family, my sister. He said he'd have her sent to the border patrols. I never wanted to hurt you. We were friends once, remember? In the schoolyard. Lyra set her mug down on the wide desk. The soft clink of ceramic on wood sounded like a judge's gavel in the quiet room. She turned slowly, her gaze resting on the man who had locked her chains. She remembered the boy who'd shared his apple with her when she was 7. She remembered the young man who'd smiled at her shyly across the bonfire. And she remembered, with perfect, icy clarity, the hollow stare of the beta as he secured her to the stone of atonement. We were never friends, Kale, she said, her voice quiet, measured. It carried effortlessly in the stillness. Friends don't feed friends to monsters. Friends don't stand by and watch as their pack's soul is sold for mining rights. I was scared. He cried, a tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. So was I, Lyra countered, her voice hardening just a fraction. But my fear didn't make me a collaborator. My fear didn't sign a contract to dig up graves. She took a step closer, not to threaten, but to be seen, to make him see her. You weren't a beta. A beta is the pack's shield, its backbone. You were just a weather vane, spinning in whatever wind blew strongest. Kalan, who had been leaning against the massive hearth with his arms crossed, observing silently, let out a low, approving grunt. Well said, the question remains. What do we do with a broken compass, my queen? The border snows are deep. Banishment would be efficient. Kale flinched, his shoulders curling in as if expecting a blow. Lyra looked at him, this man who represented every passive betrayal, every silent nod that had allowed Cedric's poison to spread. Banishment was justice. It was what he deserved, but it was also an escape. He wouldn't have to see the healing, wouldn't have to face the ruin he'd helped build every single day. No, Lyra decided, the word final. Kale looked up, a flicker of pathetic hope in his eyes. Banishment lets him run from what he's done. That is too easy. Then what? Kale whispered, confused. You will take my old position, Lyra stated, a cold, purposeful glint in her eye. She walked around the desk, her movements sure. The third-floor lavatories, the ones by the east guest wing. The grout is black with mildew. The Omegas have been complaining about the smell for years. You will scrub them. You will scrub them until they shine. And when that is done, you will report to Mara in the laundry. You will learn how to press an alpha's formal wear without burning the silk. You will serve this pack from the absolute bottom until you learn what it truly means to hold it up. Kalan's laugh was a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. Poetic and fitting, the hand that fastened the shackles will now scour the filth. Kale's face crumpled, not in anger, but in the dawning horror of a lifetime of humiliation. This wasn't exile. This was a mirror held up every day, showing him exactly what he had become. Yes, Alpha, he mumbled, his head bowing. Yes, Luna. Get him out, Kalen commanded the guards, his tone dismissing Kale from his thoughts as easily as brushing away dust. As the door closed, sealing them in the warm, quiet study once more, Kalen pushed off the mantle. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled Lyra into his arms. The solid heat of him enveloped her, a fortress against the world's chill. She melted into the embrace, resting her head against the steady, powerful drum of his heart. You are merciful, he murmured into her hair, his voice a vibration she felt in her bones. Far more than I would have been. I would have thrown him to the wolves, literally. She tilted her head back to look at him. Cedric ruled with fear and pain. It made the pack weak, brittle. We have to be different. We have to rule with a strength that doesn't need to break spirits to prove itself. She offered him a small, tired smile. Sometimes, living with your failure is a sharper punishment than any blade. Kaelan's expression softened, his violet eyes clouded with a deep, abiding awe. He traced the line of her jaw with a calloused thumb. You were the answer, he said quietly, as if realizing it fully for the first time. Not the sacrifice the prophecy demanded, but the savior it promised. The white wolf doesn't bring death, she purifies. She scours the rot away. He took her hand and led her back to the window. Below, in the main courtyard, a scene was unfolding not from command, but from instinct. Pack members were emerging from their homes. They weren't being summoned by bells or threats. They carried baskets of bread, pots of stew, tools, and firewood. They were gathering, talking in low, earnest tones, sharing what they had. The process of rebuilding trust, of becoming a community again, was beginning with a shared meal in the winter sun. The sickness is lifting, Lyra observed, her heart swelling at the sight. The land reflects its rulers, Kaelan said, his arm tightening around her waist. It always has. He turned her gently to face him. There is so much to do, Lyra. The mining contracts must be torn to shreds. The treaties with the Southern Claws need to be renegotiated from a position of true strength, not desperation. The Council of Elders must be rebuilt with wolves who remember honor, not just privilege. We will, she promised, the words a vow, but not right this moment. Kaelan raised a dark eyebrow, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Oh. And what does my queen propose we do with this singular, quiet moment? Lyra grinned, a flash of the fierce, playful wolf she had become. For 3 weeks, you ran me ragged through your mountains. You taught me to hunt, to fight, to stalk in silence. She nodded toward the vast, sun-drenched forest beyond the walls. I think it's time the pack saw their alphas run, not as conquerors returning, but as mates claiming their home. Kaelan's smile widened, a brilliant, unguarded expression that transformed his scarred face. It was the smile of the young king from the portrait, finally free. A run, he agreed, his voice dropping to an intimate rumble. That sounds like the only proper way to begin. They didn't head for the grand staircase. They moved as one to the study's balcony doors, pushing them open to the invigorating, icy blast of morning. Without a word, without a signal, they shifted. Lyra's transformation was a burst of radiant light, leaving the magnificent white wolf standing poised on the stone ledge. In the same heartbeat, a shadow coalesced beside her, the great black wolf, a creature of power and ancient grace. As one, they leaped. The white wolf landed first, a silent, ghostly splash in the deep snow of the courtyard. The black wolf landed beside her, a protective, solid shadow. Pack members below looked up, their tasks forgotten, their faces lifting not in fear, but in wonder. Then Kaelan threw back his massive head, and a howl tore from his throat. It was the voice of the mountain, deep, resonant, and victorious. It was a call that had been silent for 10 long years. Lyra joined him. Her howl was different, higher, clearer, a soaring silver thread that wove around his, a harmony of light and shadow, of strength and cleansing hope. It was a dual anthem that shook snow from the branches and echoed through the very soul of the territory. For the first time in a decade, the sound that filled the valley was not one of dread, but of belonging. The pack watched, tears freezing on some cheeks, as the two wolves, their king and their queen, their past and their future, turned from the courtyard and broke into a run. A blur of white and black, they streaked across the open field and vanished into the sun-dappled embrace of the woods. No one feared the forest anymore. They knew now what lived within it, not a curse, not a demon, but their guardians, and their promise, long live the pack. The first few days of the new reign were a fragile, hopeful dream. But dreams, Lyra was learning, were paper-thin against the hard edges of reality. The pack was like a body waking from a long, fevered sleep, disoriented, weak, and full of old aches. The physical repairs were the easiest. The neglected storehouses were inventoried, revealing how little Cedric had left for the true winter months. The damaged fences on the northern pastures were mended by work parties led by the old loyalists, men like Garrick and Silas, who moved with a vigor they hadn't shown in years. There was a shared purpose in the labor, a tangible sense of rebuilding. It was the unseen damage that festered. Lyra stood in the pack kitchen, her kitchen now, a cavernous room that was the true heart of the house. It was warm and smelled of yeast and simmering stew, a stark contrast to the cold formality of the study. Mara, the head cook, a woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, was showing her the ledgers. "The issue isn't the food we have, Luna," Mara said softly, her finger tracing a column of numbers. "It's the distribution. Under Cedric, the enforcers and their families took the choicest cuts, the freshest grain. The workers in the lower quarters, the gardeners, the stable hands, they got the leavings. The bones for broth, the stale bread. It created tears, resentment. Lyra's stomach tightened. She knew those leavings. She had lived on them. That ends today, she said, her voice firm. From now on, rations are drawn by family size and workload, not rank. We eat as one pack or we don't eat." Mara's eyes welled up. "Yes, Luna." But as Lyra left the kitchen, she felt the weight of stares. Not all were warm. In a shadowed alcove, two younger enforcers, men who had served under Kale, watched her pass. Their whispers, meant to be hidden, brushed against her newly acute hearing. "White wolf or not, she was scrubbing floors a moon ago," one muttered. "Thorn blinded by a pretty face and an old legend," the other scoffed. "This won't last. The southern claws won't treat with a king who mates with a servant. Will be a laughingstock." The words were like slivers of ice in her veins. She kept walking, her head high, but the doubt had been seeded. The true test came that afternoon in the Great Hall. Kaelan had called the first open pack meeting. The room was packed, a sea of wary faces. He stood before them, not on the gaudy dais, but on the floor among them, Lyra at his side. "We begin anew." Kaelan's voice filled the space, calm and authoritative. "The mines will not be dug. The contracts are ash. Our first duty is to our land and our ancestors. To that end, all hunting parties will now include members from every quarter. Enforcers will hunt alongside gardeners. We share the labor, we share the bounty." A murmur of approval rose, but it was not unanimous. An older wolf, Haldor, a former council member under Cedric known for his conservative views, stood up. His posture was respectful, but his eyes were flint. "Alpha Thorn," Haldor began, his voice gravelly, "your return is miraculous. And your mate's unique nature is a sign from the goddess." He paused, the compliment feeling thin. "But tradition holds that the alpha's mate is from a strong lineage to ensure powerful heirs, to blend the bloodlines of the pack's strongest families. Forgive an old wolf his bluntness, but what alliance does this new match bring us?" The hall went deathly quiet. It was the question everyone had been thinking, spoken aloud by a voice that still carried weight. Lyra felt her face grow warm, but she forced herself to breathe, to stand still. This was not a physical attack. It was a challenge to her very right to stand where she stood. Kaelan's expression didn't change, but the air around him grew several degrees colder. Before he could speak, another voice rang out. "It brings us honor." An elderly woman, Ilara, the pack's oldest weaver and a keeper of oral history, pushed her way to the front. Her back was bent, but her eyes were fierce. "I have lived through 5 alphas. I remember the stories my grandmother told, of the white wolf who appears only when the pack has lost its way. She is not an alliance for trade. She is the moon goddess's answer to our prayers for purity. She cleanses the stain from our hearts, not our pedigree. The old woman turned, glaring at Haldor. You speak of strong bloodlines? Cedric's blood was strong, and look what his greed bred. I will take the goddess's chosen over a politician's daughter any day. A swell of supportive murmurs, particularly from the lower quarters, met her words. The divide was now visible in the room. Kaelan finally raised a hand. The subtle gesture silenced them all. He looked at Haldor, then at the old weaver, and finally at his pack. The moon goddess, he said, his voice resonant with a quiet, unshakable truth, does not make mistakes. Lyra is my fated mate. That is the only alliance, the only lineage that matters to the true magic of our kind. Her strength saved me. Her purity is saving you. The past is a lesson, not a chain. We will forge a new tradition, one of merit, of loyalty, of shared sacrifice. Those who cannot see that future, he let the sentence hang, his violet gaze sweeping the room, may find the past a lonely place to dwell. Haldor bowed his head, chastened but not necessarily convinced. The meeting continued, but the tension lingered like wood smoke. Later, in the privacy of their chambers, the weight of the day settled on Lyra's shoulders. She stood by the fire, staring into the flames. He wasn't entirely wrong, she said quietly. I bring no army, no wealth, only me. Kaelan came up behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. You brought me back from the dead, he said simply. You are the key that unlocked my kingdom. You are the living proof that our pack's soul is not lost. That is an army, a treasure, and a legacy all in one. He turned her to face him. The doubts are the echoes of Cedric's poison. It will take time to clear the air. You must be patient and you must be strong. Not just in the forest, but in here. He tapped a finger gently against her temple, then over her heart. I just don't want to be the reason your reign falters, she whispered, the fear finally spilling out. Kaelan's smile was tender. Lyra, you are the reason my reign has begun. Every king needs a queen, but I need more than a queen. I need my equal, my conscience, my storm. He kissed her forehead. And that is exactly what you are. Now rest. Tomorrow, the real work continues. But as Lyra lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Alpha's wing, the whispers from the alcove echoed in her mind. Laughing stock. She clenched her fists in the furs. She had faced the shadow wolf and a traitor's blade. She could face the doubts of her own people. She had to, for him, for them, for the pack they were meant to be. The unification had begun with a howl. Now, the harder, quieter work of healing the cracks had to follow. And she was at the very center of the fracture. The work was bone deep and unglamorous. Ledgers, rosters, disputes over stolen winter stores, this was the clay from which a new pack would be molded. Yet, amidst the administrative grind, Kaelan insisted on one sacred ritual, the ancestral glade. They went at dusk, just the two of them. It lay a mile beyond the western tree line, a place where the ancient pines formed a silent, towering cathedral. No torches were needed. The moon, nearing full, silvered the path and the undisturbed snow. The silence here was different from the woods around Thorn's Lodge. It was a listening silence, thick with memory. As they entered the clearing, Lyra felt it, a hum in the air, a vibration in the soil beneath her boots. It was the accumulated heartbeat of generations. Stone markers, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, stood in peaceful rows, draped in cloaks of white. Kaelan stopped before a large, plain stone at the head of the glade. He placed a hand on its cold surface, his head bowed. Lyra hung back, feeling like an intruder in a private conversation. Father, Kaelan's voice was soft, a son's murmur, not a king's command. I am home. He was silent for a long moment, as if listening to a reply only he could hear. Then he straightened and gestured for Lyra to join him. This is Alastair Thorne, the last true king before the darkness fell. Lyra approached slowly, a strange reverence filling her. She placed her own hand beside his on the stone. A jolt, not electric but warm and profound, shot up her arm. For a fleeting second, she felt not grief, but a deep, resonant approval. He would have loved you, Kaelan said, his voice thick. He valued spirit above bloodline. He always said a pack's strength was in its heart, not its talons. They walked among the stones. Kaelan told her stories of the warrior maiden Lyra who defended the pass from mountain cats, of the wise Beta Orin who negotiated the first treaty with the river Pax, of his own mother, Elara, who had healed an entire season's blight with her knowledge of herbs. The glade was no longer a cemetery. It was a library of lives, a testament to what Silver Fang had been. This is what Cedric wanted to sell, Kaelan said finally, his voice turning to gravel. Not just land, not just lithium. He wanted to sell their stories. To erase them, to make it so they never mattered. The violation of it struck Lyra anew, more personal now. She looked at the moon-washed stones. They won't be forgotten, she vowed, the words a promise to the silent air. We'll bring the pack here. We'll tell the stories again. Kaelan nodded, but a shadow crossed his face. It will not be that simple. The glade's magic, it's weakened. I can feel it. Cedric's neglect, the pack's fractured spirit, it has dimmed the connection. The land is healing, but this place, this heart needs a stronger beat. He turned to her, his violet eyes glowing in the twilight. There is an old rite, the rite of remembering. It's performed by the alpha pair at the solstice to reaffirm the bond between the living pack and the ancestral guardians. It hasn't been done in 10 years, the thread is frayed. Then we'll do it, Lyra said without hesitation. At the next solstice. It requires more than just words, Kaelan warned. It requires a show of unity so pure, it echoes in the spirit realm. It requires the Alpha and Luna to be in perfect harmony, their bond a beacon. And it requires an offering of shared strength to the glade itself. A physical testament of our pledge to the past. Whatever it takes, Lyra insisted, feeling the rightness of it down to her core. This was a purpose she understood, not politics, not lineage, but faith. As they turned to leave, a flicker of movement at the far edge of the glade caught Lyra's eye. A figure, half hidden behind a massive pine trunk. Watching, she froze, her senses snapping alert. Kaelan followed her gaze, his body tensing. The figure ducked back, but not before the moonlight caught a pale, gaunt face streaked with what looked like mud or old tears. It was a young man, a face she didn't recognize from the village. Kaelan took a step forward, a low growl building in his chest. Who is there? Show yourself in the presence of your alphas. There was no answer, only the sound of frantic, stumbling footsteps retreating into the deep woods, heading not toward the packlands, but away into the wild northern wastes. Lyra's heart pounded. Who was that? Kaelan's face was grim. I don't know, but he was not one of ours. His scent was feral, old, and full of grief. He stared into the darkness where the stranger had vanished. The glade calls to more than just us, it seems. Its weakness may be calling to things that have been forgotten. The peace of the sacred place was shattered. Their mission to heal the glade had just taken on a new, unsettling dimension. The past wasn't just sleeping in the stones. Something from it was awake. And it was watching. The phantom in the glade haunted the edges of their new peace. Kaelan doubled the patrols, not out of fear of invasion, but of a different, more insidious threat, a sickness of memory. The pack's energy, however, was focused inward, on the tangible proof of a new era. The first public hunt under the new rules was a deliberate piece of theater, and Lyra was its reluctant star. The party consisted of Garrick, the grizzled loyalist, Benji, a clever, quiet tracker from the lower quarters, and Rylan, one of the skeptical young enforcers from the alcove, and Lyra. They moved through the winter forest, a tense, silent unit. Garrick and Benji were respectful. Ryland's silence was a loud, simmering disapproval. They'd found the trail of a large stag, its tracks clear in the fresh snow. "It's heading for the thicket by the ravine," Benji whispered, pointing. "We can flank it." Ryland scoffed softly. "A classic pincer, if everyone moves with precision. If not, we spook it into the gorge and lose the meat." His eyes flicked to Lyra, implying the variable. Lyra said nothing. She breathed in the cold air, letting the forest speak to her. The wind shifted, carrying more than just the scent of pine and prey. It carried a whisper of musk, of unwashed fur, and that same strange grief she'd sensed in the glade, the stranger. He was nearby, a shadow moving parallel to their hunt, her focus split. The stag was ahead. The mystery was to their left, the plan unfolded. Garrick and Benji moved to circle. Ryland gestured for Lyra to take a position to the right, a simple, static post. She nodded, but her eyes scanned the left tree line. There, a flicker of dun-colored fur against the snow, not a deer, but a wolf, thin and ragged, watching them with eyes that held a human kind of anguish. At that moment, the stag bolted. Not from Garrick's side, but from Ryland's. The enforcer had stepped on a dry branch. The magnificent animal surged forward, heading straight for the treacherous ravine edge. Instinct took over. Lyra didn't think. She moved. Shifting mid-stride in a flash of white light, her wolf form exploded from her clothes. She wasn't the largest wolf, but she was fast, unnaturally fast. She cut across the stag's path not to attack, but to herd. Using her body as a living barrier, she angled its frantic charge away from the deadly drop, back toward Garrick, who was ready, his own wolf leaping from the brush in a perfectly timed tackle. The struggle was brief, efficient. The stag was down. Silence returned, broken only by heavy panting. Garrick and Benji shifted back, their faces stunned. Ryland stood frozen, his earlier arrogance replaced by slack-jawed shock. He had seen speed and grace beyond any enforcer's training. He had seen the white wolf not as a symbol, but as a hunter, a protector of the pack's food. Lyra shifted back, pulling on her discarded clothes, her expression calm. She looked at Rylan. "Precision isn't just about feet," she said quietly. "It's about intention." The intention was to feed the pack, not to prove a point. Ryland swallowed hard, then gave a stiff, genuine nod. It wasn't full acceptance, but the door to doubt had been cracked open. As the men prepared to field dress the kill, Lyra slipped away. She followed the fading scent of grief, moving like a ghost herself. She found the place where the ragged wolf had stood. In the snow, there were paw prints, yes, but also the imprint of a human hand, pressed into the snow as if in pain. And beside it, half buried, was a small, carved wooden figurine, a howling wolf, its craftsmanship exquisite, ancient, and stained with what looked like old blood. She pocketed the figurine, her mind racing. This was no mere rogue. This was someone with history, with a connection to something old. And he was drawn to the glade or to her. Returning to the lodge, the successful hunt was the talk of the lower quarters. The story grew in the telling, the Luna's miraculous save, the weight of the stag, the first full meat distribution in living memory. Hope became a little more solid, tasted like venison stew. That night in their chamber, Lyra showed Kalen the figurine. He took it, his fingers tracing the intricate lines. His face paled. "This is old fang carving," he whispered. "A style lost 2 generations ago. It's from a branch of the pack that splintered off, the ones who followed my uncle, Kieran, into the northern wastes after a dispute with my father. They were never heard from again. They were called the Ghost Fangs. The man in the glade could be a descendant, Kalen finished, his eyes dark. If they've been living out there, surviving, why return now? And why skulk? Why not approach the Alpha? Lyra remembered the handprint in the snow, the imprint of despair. Maybe he can't, maybe he's not just grieving, maybe he's trapped. Or cursed. She met Kaelan's gaze. The glade's weakened magic, this lost kin appearing they're connected, I feel it. Kaelan clenched the figurine in his fist. A splintered pack, a weakened heart, it's a vulnerability. If the ghost fangs are not just lost, but broken, their pain could be seeping back into our land, drawn to the glade's sickness like rot to a wound. He looked at her, a new urgency in his eyes. The right of remembering isn't just about our pack anymore. It may be about mending a fracture that is decades old, about calling home a ghost. The scope of their task suddenly expanded vertiginously. They weren't just healing the present, they were being asked to heal the past. And the past, it seemed, was not done with them. It was here, watching from the trees, its eyes full of a sorrow that threatened to bleed into their fragile new dawn. The figurine became an obsession. It sat on the windowsill of their study, a silent, accusing guest. Kaelan sent scouts discreetly north into the rugged, barren territory known as the Frostfang Expanse. They returned days later, hollow-eyed and spooked. Nothing lives there, Alpha, Garrick reported, his voice subdued. Not rabbits, not birds. The silence, it's a weight. We found signs of an old camp, long abandoned. Fire pit stones cold for years, and these. He dropped a handful of more carvings onto the desk. A bear, a fox, all in the same exquisite, ancient style, all scoured smooth by wind as if wept upon for decades. No bodies? Kalen asked, his voice tight. None. No graves either. It's as if they just faded into the snow. The mystery was a splinter under the skin of the pack's recovery. Meanwhile, the daily business of ruling continued, and with it, the subtle resistance. Haldor, the traditionalist elder, had become a quiet hub for the discontented. His criticisms were never direct, always couched in concern for pack stability and established protocols. Lyra felt it most during her attempts to revive the pack's lore-keeping. She started a nightly story circle in the main hall, inviting elders to share tales of the old days, not just of battles, but of cooperation, of blizzards weathered together, of pups saved by communal effort. The first night, only a handful from the lower quarters came. The second, a few more. But the seats where enforcers and their families usually sat remained conspicuously empty. Haldor's influence. Then came the incident with the water pump. The main well's pump, long, creaking, and inefficient, finally seized. The blacksmith, a bear of a man named Torvin who had always been kind to Lyra, declared it needed parts from a southern trader. It would take a week, he said, shrugging. A week of hauling water in buckets from the frozen river for the entire pack. Lyra remembered the pump's schematics from her days of cleaning the repair shed. She'd seen the broken part before. Torvin, she said, approaching him in the smithy. The drive cog. It's the same as the old grain mills, isn't it? The one in the west storehouse that hasn't run in years. Couldn't we cannibalize it? Torvin blinked, wiping grease from his hands. He looked surprised, then thoughtful, then slightly embarrassed. Aye, Luna, I suppose we could. I just assumed the mill cog would be rusted solid. Shall we go see? She asked with a smile. They went. The cog was rusty but sound. With some effort, they freed it. By that afternoon, the pump was groaning back to life. It was a small victory, but a public one. Torvin praised her sharp eyes to anyone who would listen. The lower quarters celebrated the running water. But in the enforcer's mess, Lyra overheard the tail end of a conversation as she passed the open door. Shows up the blacksmith to make herself look clever, a voice muttered. It was Rylan, but he didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded uneasy. Haldor says it's undermining our structures, that a Luna shouldn't be elbow deep in machinery. He also says a real Luna would have had that pump fixed by Southern craftsmen in a day, using Alliance funds, another voice grumbled. Instead, we're scavenging like rogues. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they revealed the depth of the fracture. To some, her practicality was a virtue. To others, it was proof of her inadequacy. She was caught between two worlds, healing one and alienating the other. That night, the dream came. She was in the ancestral glade, but it was wrong. The stones were blackened as if by fire. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was a scream trapped in ice. And standing in the center was the gaunt young man from the trees. He wasn't watching her. He was howling, a soundless, agonized howl that shook the dream world. From his mouth poured not sound, but a thick, dark smoke that coiled around the stones, choking them. Behind him, shadows moved, wolves, but translucent, flickering like bad memories. The ghost fangs. They were fading, pulled apart into wisps of that same dark smoke. The glade was not just weak. It was being used as an anchor for their dissolution, a wound through which the past was bleeding out. Lyra woke with a gasp, her skin clammy. Kaelan was already awake, propped on an elbow, his violet eyes glowing in the dark. You felt it too, he stated, his voice grim. The dream, the glade, is sicker than we thought. It's not just neglected, it's infected by their sorrow. Kaelan sat up, running a hand through his hair. Haldor and his traditionalists cling to the past like a lifeline, but they cling to a polished, empty version of it. They don't understand. The true past, the unhealed wounds, the abandoned kin, that past is a living thing, and it's in pain. That pain is seeping into our foundations. He looked at her, the strategist in him wrestling with the spiritual leader. The rite of remembering is in 3 days on the solstice. It was meant to be a simple reaffirmation. Now, he took her hand, his grip firm. Now it must be a surgery. We must not just remember our own ancestors. We must find a way to speak to the lost ones, to acknowledge their pain, to bring the ghost fangs home, in spirit if not in body. If we don't, their grief will poison the glade forever, and our pack will forever be divided, haunted by a ghost story we refuse to hear. The weight of it was colossal. Lyra thought of her simple wish to belong, to help. Now she was being asked to mediate between the living and the dead, to heal a rift older than she was. We need to know more, she said, her own resolve hardening. We need to find that young man, before the rite. He is the key. Kaelan nodded. Tomorrow, we hunt a different kind of prey, not for meat, for a ghost. He looked out the window at the moon-bathed landscape. The solstice approaches. The veil between worlds will be thin. We must be ready to face what comes through, whether it seeks peace or wishes only to make us share its pain. They went at first light, just the two of them. This was not a hunt for the pack to see. It was a pilgrimage into silence. They followed the scent of grief north, past the Frostfang border stones, into the expanse. The land here was a study in desolation. The wind didn't whistle. It moaned, scraping across bare rock and sculpting the snow into strange, weary shapes. Life had been leached from this place. Kaelan moved like part of the shadows, his senses stretched to their limit. Lyra walked beside him, her white wolf simmering just beneath her skin, drawn to the pervasive sorrow like a compass needle to a tragic north. They found the abandoned camp Garrick had described. It was less a camp and more a scar. A few circles of blackened stone, the remnants of shelters so old they were just skeletal impressions in the earth. No bones, no trash, no recent signs of life. Only the wind and the crushing, empty silence. He's not living here, Lyra whispered, her voice swallowed by the vastness. This is a shrine to absence. Kaelin crouched, picking up another small carving, this one of an eagle, its wings spread as if frozen mid-flight. They didn't fade, they were called or cursed. This grief, it's not passive. It's a force, it pulled them away from life. A new sound threaded through the wind, a faint, rhythmic thump, 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 like a slow, laboring heartbeat. They followed it, climbing a treacherous, icy ridge. At the top, the vista stole Lyra's breath. Below lay a small, sheltered valley, hidden from the expanse's worst fury. And in its center stood a single, massive, ancient pine, its trunk wider than a cabin. It was dead. Not winter dormant, but truly dead, its needles long gone, its skeletal branches clawing at the gray sky. And at its base, the source of the sound. The young man. He was on his knees, forehead pressed against the blackened bark of the great tree. In his hand, he held a smooth river stone, and with a terrible, deliberate slowness, he was pounding it against the tree's root. Thump, thump, thump. Each impact was a punctuation mark in a story of endless, grinding pain. He was emaciated, clad in ragged furs, his dark hair matted. But it was his eyes, when he finally sensed them and turned his head, that broke Lyra's heart. They were the color of a winter sky, and they held a depth of loss so profound it was like looking into a well with no bottom. He didn't startle. He didn't growl. He simply stared as if they were phantoms he'd expected all along. "Who are you?" Kaelan's voice was low, not commanding, but inviting. The young man's lips moved, but no sound came out for a long moment. When it did, it was a rasp, like stone grinding on stone. "I am the echo, the last note of a song no one remembers." He looked back at the tree, his hand pausing its rhythmic beating. "She is gone, the heart tree. She was our tether, our memory. She died, and we began to forget, first our stories, then our names, then each other." Lyra took a careful step forward. "The ghost fangs." He flinched at the name as if it were a physical blow. "We are not ghosts. We are the fading. We clung here to the last place she lived, but her roots could not reach the glade. The connection was severed long ago by pride and anger." He looked at Kaelan, a spark of recognition flickering in the desolate landscape of his eyes. "You have his face, the peacemaker, Alistair, your father. He was the last to try." Before the great silence fell between our peoples, Kaelan knelt, bringing himself to the young man's level. "What is your name?" The question seemed to cause him physical pain. He struggled, his brow furrowed. "I was called Finn. I think it is hard to hold. The forgetting is cold. It is the true winter." Lyra understood then. The Glade's magic wasn't just a spiritual link, it was a living archive, a network. The Heart Tree had been a branch of that network for the Splinter Pack. When the schism happened, the connection was damaged. When the tree died, the connection for the Ghost Fangs shattered entirely. Without it, they were losing their very identities, dissolving into raw, unattached sorrow, the dark smoke from her dream. "You are drawn to our glade," Lyra said softly. Finn nodded, a tear carving a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "The pull, it is the only warmth left, but it is a sick warmth. It calls to our pain, not to us. It drinks our sorrow and gives nothing back. It is making the sickness worse." He looked at them, a desperate, wild hope kindling in his eyes for the first time. "You are the White Wolf. The stories, the old stories my grandmother whispered before she forgot her own tongue, they said you would come when the heart was sick. Can you heal the song? Can you make the tree remember? Can you make us remember?" The play hung in the frozen air. The enormity of it was staggering. They had come to find a ghost, and instead found a dying library begging to be read before its pages turned to dust. Kaelan placed a hand on the dead heart tree. He closed his eyes, his expression one of intense concentration. After a long minute, he opened them, his violet gaze meeting Lyra's. There's a faint pulse, not life but memory, trapped like a seed in permafrost. He stood, looking from Finn's desperate face to the dead tree, then back toward the south, toward Silver Fang. The right of remembering, he said, his voice gaining the iron certainty of a king. It was never just for our pack. It is for all the children of the original Fang. We must perform it here at this tree and in the glade. Simultaneously, we must create a bridge. We must sing the song of belonging so loudly that it reaches the frozen seed here and forces the glade to acknowledge its lost branch. Lyra's mind raced. But the rite requires the alpha pair. We can't be in two places at once. Kaelan's gaze locked with hers, a fierce, unbreakable bond passing between them. We are one heart in two bodies. If our bond is true, if our intention is pure, distance is an illusion to the spirit. He looked at Finn. You will be our anchor here. You will hold the space. You will remember for this one moment that you are Finn of the Fangs. Can you do that? Finn's entire body trembled. He looked at the dead tree, at his own trembling hands, then back at Kaelan. The struggle was visible, a war against the consuming cold of oblivion. Slowly, he clenched his fists and straightened his spine. A flicker of the wolf he had been, of the man he could be, shone through. I will remember, he vowed, the words a fragile, defiant flame in the wasteland. They had their answer, they had their ghost. And now they had a plan so perilous, so reliant on faith and the strength of their untested bond, that the thought of failure was a yawning chasm at their feet. The solstice was in 2 days. They would either mend a half-century of fracture or shatter themselves trying. The eve of the winter solstice held a breathless, crystalline tension. In Silver Fang, preparations for the rite of remembering were public, ceremonial. Pine boughs were woven with silver thread. The path to the ancestral glade was cleared and lit by lanterns. The pack, from highest to lowest, was expected to gather at the tree line, to witness, to lend their collective spirit to the Alpha and Luna. But in the Alpha's lodge, a far more delicate operation was underway. Garrick and Benji, sworn to secrecy, were being given their instructions. Torvin the blacksmith, his loyalty won by a salvaged cog, waited with a packed sled. Kaelan stood before them, his presence filling the small strategy room. You understand the stakes, he said, his voice low and grave. This is not defiance of tradition. This is its deepest fulfillment. We mend a wound so old, most have forgotten it exists. Garrick, his grizzled face set in lines of absolute conviction, nodded. The ghost fangs were a tale my grandfather told in whispers. If we can bring them peace, it is worth any risk, Alpha. Benji, Kaelan turned to the tracker. The expanse will be treacherous. The solstice moon will guide you, but the cold is a predator. Get Torvin and the supplies to the Heart Tree Valley. Protect Finn. Hold the space. Light the fire when the first star appears. That is your only signal. Benji touched his forehead in a gesture of respect. We will be the steady hand, Alpha. Lyra's role was the most complex. She had to stand before the entire pack, Project Calm and Unity, while her spirit would be engaged in a battle an hour's hard run away. She felt split already, a strange duality settling in her soul. The hardest conversation came next, with Elder Haldor. They summoned him to the study. The old wolf entered, his posture proud, his eyes wary. Elder, Kaelan began, not from behind the desk, but standing as an equal. Tomorrow's rite is more than ceremony. A truth has come to light, one that speaks to the very traditions you hold dear. He told the story, not of a ghost, but of a splinter, of Alistair Thorne's lost brother, Kieran. of the schism born of pride that severed the heart tree from the glade, of the slow, tragic fading of an entire branch of their family. He spoke of Finn, the last echo, clinging to memory in a dead valley. Haldor listened, his initial resistance melting into dawning, horrified comprehension. The past he idolized had a hidden chapter, one of failure and loss. The right must bridge that gap, Lyra said, her voice gentle but firm. But to do so, Kaelan must be at the heart tree, and I must be here in the glade. Our bond must be the thread that stitches the wound closed. Haldor stared at them. You would split the alpha pair on the most sacred night? The lore is clear. The rite requires your physical presence together. The lore was written before a pack was broken, Kaelan countered, his eyes glowing. It speaks of harmony, of one heart. Can our hearts not beat as one across a distance, if the purpose is to heal a division greater than miles? The old wolf was silent for a long time, wrestling with a lifetime of dogma. Finally, he let out a shuddering sigh. My father, he spoke sometimes of his cousin who went north. He always said it was a shame. He looked up, his old eyes gleaming with unexpected tears. The greatest tradition is the survival of the pack, the whole pack, even the lost parts. What must I do? Lyra felt a surge of relief. You must lead the pack's observance here. You must hold their faith. You must explain, when the time comes, that their alpha is on a pilgrimage to reclaim a lost piece of their own history. You must make them understand that this is not an absence, it is a reaching out. Haldor straightened his spine, a new purpose etching his features. The critic was becoming a crucial ally. I will make them understand, he vowed. The plan was set. A deception for the greater truth. As the shortest day of the year dawned, the pack gathered. A hushed, expectant crowd amassed at the edge of the glade, their breath pluming in the still, cold air. Lyra stood before them at the entrance, dressed in a simple white fur robe. She looked every inch the Luna, calm, radiant, her white wolf shimmering just beneath her skin. Haldor stepped forward, his voice carrying over the crowd with an authority they recognized. Brothers and sisters, tonight we remember, but some memories are buried by time and snow. Our alpha, Kaelan Thorn, in the spirit of the truest remembrance, has embarked at dawn on a solstice quest to find a memory lost to us all. He seeks to bring it home. The Luna will anchor us here, and their bonded spirits will weave our past whole once more. A confused murmur rippled through the pack. A quest on the night of the rite? But Haldor's earnestness, the gravity in Lyra's eyes, stilled the doubt. This was unconventional, but it felt significant. As twilight deepened, Lyra turned and walked alone into the glade. The moon, full and colossal, rose, bathing the stone markers in an ethereal blue light. She knelt in the center of the clearing, where the energy was strongest. She placed her hands on the frozen earth, closed her eyes, and reached, not with her voice, with her essence. She thought of Kaelan, not just his face, but his scent, the feel of his hand in hers, the sound of his laugh, the steady, righteous fury of his heart. She poured her love for him, her faith in their bond, into the ground, a silent, powerful call. I am here, our pack is here, we remember, we are waiting. Miles away in the dead valley of the Frostfang expanse, Kaelan knelt before the massive skeletal heart tree. A small fire, lit by Benji, crackled at its base. Finn sat across from him, his eyes clenched shut, holding onto his name with every shred of his will. Kaelan placed his own hands on the ancient, dead bark. He poured his memories into it, not just his own, but the stories his father had told him of Uncle Kieran, of the laughter that once existed between the brothers, of the shared history before the prideful split. He sent the love for a pack he never knew, the regret for a schism he did not cause but was born to heal. Hear me, he willed into the frozen wood. Your children are not forgotten. We call you home. Back in the glade, Lyra felt it, a stirring. Not in the air, but in the connection between her and Kalan. It was as if the thread that bound them was vibrating, humming with a note so pure it resonated in both locations at once. The moon's light seemed to brighten, focusing on her, on the stones around her. In the crowd at the tree line, the pack felt it too, a warmth in the chest. A sudden, vivid memory surfacing in each mind, a personal, precious memory of belonging, of family, of pack. An elder remembered the feel of his father's hand on his first shift. A young mother remembered the pack's howl welcoming her newborn. They weren't just observing a rite, they were fueling it with their own remembered love. In the dead valley, Finn gasped. His eyes flew open. For a moment, they were clear, focused, free of grief. I see them, he whispered. Around the tree, they are smiling. And Kalen saw it too, not with his eyes, but with his spirit. Flickering, translucent forms of wolves and men and women, the ghost fangs, gathering around their heart tree. The dark smoke of their sorrow began to recede, drawn back, replaced by a soft, silver luminescence, the light of acknowledgement. The two rites, separated by miles, became one. The bridge was forming. The song of remembrance was being sung in two-part harmony, by a king in a wasteland and a queen in a glade, their love the chorus that united them. But the strain was immense. Lyra felt a tearing sensation, as if her soul was stretched taut over the distance. Kaelan's form by the distant tree flickered in her mind's eye. The connection was fragile, a spider's silk holding up the weight of decades of sorrow. They had reached the precipice. The bridge was there, but could it hold? The strain was a physical agony. In the glade, Lyra's knees trembled against the frozen earth. It felt as if a vital cord anchored in her chest was being pulled north, stretching toward a breaking point. Each beat of her heart sent a throb of effort through the psychic tether. The moonlight, once a gentle bath, now felt like a spotlight of immense pressure, pinning her to her task. Hold on, just hold on. She could feel Kalan, not his thoughts, but the raw expenditure of his will, a furnace burning fiercely in the dead valley. She could feel the fragile, flickering presence of Finn, a tiny, brave flame refusing to be snuffed out. And she could feel the other presence now, drawn by their combined call, the ghost fangs. Not as individuals, but as a collective sigh of sorrow, a nebula of lost memories swirling at the edge of her perception, drawn to the bridge they were building. Across the distance, in her mind, Kaelan's voice was a strained whisper. Lyra, the tree, it's not enough. The memory is here, but it's locked in ice. We need a key, a specific memory, one of unity before the split. Her mind raced, a specific memory. She was pouring out her love for him, their pack's general memories, but what single moment could unlock a half-century of silence? Then it came to her, not from her own life, but from a story. The story Kaelan had told her in this very glade of his mother, Ilara. The healer, she had not just healed blight, she had once brokered a peace between feuding hunters from the main pack and the northern branch, using a shared childhood memory of catching fireflies at the summer pond. That was it. Not a memory of battle or alpha power, but of innocent, shared joy. A memory from before the divide. Focusing with every fiber of her being, Lyra pushed past the pain. She didn't send her own memory. She reconstructed the story as a living scene. She poured into the bridge the imagined sensation of warm summer air, the chirp of crickets, the cool water of the pond, the wonder of tiny, blinking lights cupped in young, cooperative hands. She sent the feeling of laughter between cousins, the uncomplicated friendship of pups who did not yet know they were from different branches. In the dead valley, Kaelan received the cascade of sensory memory. He understood instantly. He pressed his hands harder against the heart tree's bark and channeled it, amplifying it, weaving Lyra's imagined memory with the faint, frozen echoes of actual joy he could sense trapped within the wood. Finn! Kaelan's mental cry was sharp. Do you remember the Firefly Pond? Your grandfather with mine, on his knees, Finn jolted. His eyes, screwed shut in concentration, flew open, wide, and clear. A choked sound, part sob, part laugh, escaped him. The jar, they used Grandfather Kieran's honey jar. They let them all go at once, and it was like a shower of stars. The memory wasn't his own, it was inherited, passed down, and nearly lost. But it was specific. It was real. That specific, shared memory was the key. A soundless crack echoed in both places, not in the air, but in the spirit. In the glade, every ancestral stone pulsed once with a soft, blue-white light. In the dead valley, a single, impossible green shoot, vibrant and defiant, pushed up through the snow at the base of the heart tree, curling around Finn's frozen fingers. The swirling nebula of grief that was the ghost fangs changed. The dark smoke of sorrow didn't vanish, but it condensed, clarified. The formless sighs resolved into faint, smiling faces, into the translucent shapes of wolves sitting peacefully. The anguish of being forgotten was replaced by the peace of being remembered. The bridge wasn't just holding, it was flooding with light. Lyra felt the tearing sensation ease, replaced by a profound, humming wholeness. The tether between her and Kaelan was no longer a strained thread, but a conduit of radiant power. She could feel the entire pack at the tree line, their individual memories now joining into a river of collective belonging that flowed through her, across the bridge, and into the valley, washing over the ghost fangs, welcoming them home. Kaelan's voice came through, strong and clear now, filled with awe. They're at peace. They're stepping into the light. The tree, it will sleep now, but it will sleep whole. Finn, Lyra opened her eyes. She was still in the glade, but everything was sharper, more alive. The moonlit snow glowed. The pine scent was sweeter. And the stones, they seemed to hum with a satisfied, quiet joy. She slowly rose to her feet, her body aching but her spirit soaring. She turned and walked back to the entrance of the glade. The pack was silent, but it was a different silence. The confusion was gone. Every face was tilted toward her, illuminated by the moon and wet with tears, not of sadness, but of a cathartic, overwhelming recognition. They had felt it. They had remembered. They had, for a moment, been one with their lost kin. Elder Haldor stepped forward, his own face streaked with tears. He didn't speak. He simply went to one knee before her, bowing his head deeply. The gesture was followed by every single wolf in the clearing, enforcers, elders, cooks, gardeners. A sea of bowed heads under the moon. The message was unmistakable. The last vestige of doubt had been swept away by the tide of memory they had just collectively ridden. Lyra looked out at them, her pack, her heart too full for words. She simply nodded, accepting their silent oath. The schism of the past was healed, not by erasing it, but by finally, fully remembering it. The pack was no longer just Silver Fang. It was, in spirit, whole once more. But as the pack began to rise, chattering in hushed, reverent tones, a lone figure emerged from the forest path. It was Benji, his face etched with exhaustion and profound emotion. He walked straight to Lyra and Haldor. Luna, Elder, he said, his voice hoarse. The Alpha is returning. He brings a guest. The final piece of the past was not just a memory, it was coming home. Kaelan returned with the dawn. The first pink rays of the solstice sun stretched across the snow as he walked into the main courtyard, Finn a half step behind him. The young man was clean, wrapped in a spare fur from the sled, his damp hair dark against his pale skin. He walked with the careful steps of someone on unfamiliar ground, but his head was up, his winter sky eyes clear, taking in the pack house, the smoke from chimneys, the faces beginning to gather at windows and doors. The silence that greeted them was not of shock, but of a breath held. The pack had felt the miracle in their souls hours before, now they saw its living proof. Kalan stopped in the center of the courtyard. He looked weary to his bones, the scars on his face standing out in the sharp morning light, but his violet eyes blazed with a quiet, unshakable triumph. Lyra came down the main steps, meeting him halfway. No words passed between them. He simply opened his arm, and she stepped into his side, his strength supporting her, her presence grounding him. Together, they turned to face their pack. Pack of Silver Fang, Kalan's voice, though tired, carried to every ear. Last night, we did not just remember our own. We reached across a chasm of years and pride, and we brought home our lost kin. He gestured to Finn, who flinched slightly under the weight of 100 stares. This is Finn, the last son of the northern branch. The ghost fangs are gone, their spirits at rest, their sorrow lifted. But their blood, their memory, returns to us in him. He paused, letting the truth settle. The heart tree is dead, but from its roots a new shoot grows, a promise. Our past is not a chain, nor is it a ghost to be feared. It is our foundation, now made whole. Elder Haldor stepped forward. He did not look at Kalan, but at Finn. His old eyes, once so full of rigid tradition, were now soft with remorse. My father never spoke your grandfather's name without a sigh, Haldor said, his voice thick. We were taught it was a story of rebellion. We were wrong. It was a story of a family that broke. Welcome home, son, however late. It was the final, public absolution. The last bastion of the old guard had not just accepted the new way, he had blessed it. Finn's composure broke. A single, quiet sob shook his shoulders. He nodded, unable to speak. Kalan spoke again. The work is not done. The mines are gone, but the fields are still fallow. The stores are thin. The winter is long. We have mended our spirit, but our bodies must follow. He looked around at the gathered faces, Rylan and the other enforcers, Mara from the kitchens, Torvin from the smithy, the children peeking from behind their parents' legs. We will not just survive this winter. We will thrive in it, not as separate quarters, but as one den. The hunter will teach the cook to track. The cook will teach the hunter to preserve. The elder will tell stories to the young, and the young will chop wood for the elder. We are not roles, we are a pack. He raised his and Lyra's joined hands. Your Alpha and your Luna will lead you, but we will not lead from a throne, we will lead from the front. The first furrow plowed when the thaw comes will be ours. The first watch on the longest night will be ours. A new energy, practical and fierce, began to replace the awe. Heads nodded, shoulders squared. The shared spiritual experience of the night before was transforming into a shared purpose for the morning after. Lyra felt it then, the final, solid click of the bond not just between her and Kalan, but between them and every soul in the territory. It was a network of light and loyalty, humming with potential. She saw the path forward, not as a queen on a dais, but as the heart of a living, breathing organism. She saw the school they would build in the spring, the archives where Finn's recovered memories would be written down next to the old stories, the shared hunts, the mended fences. Later, in the quiet of their chamber as the pack buzzed with activity below, Kalan pulled her close. It is done, he murmured into her hair. The usurper is gone, the past is healed, the pack is won. Lyra leaned back to look at him. It is just beginning, she corrected softly. Today was the foundation, tomorrow we build. He smiled, that rare, true smile that transformed his face. Together, always, the story of the sacrifice was over. The girl chained to the stone was gone, her fear transformed into strength, her loneliness into belonging. The cursed wolf in the shadows was gone, his exile ended, his throne reclaimed. But the story of the whole pack, that story was just writing its first bold sentence. A story of a black wolf who was a king, a white wolf who was his heart, and the united territory that would howl their legend for generations to come. They had faced the darkness within and without, and they had not just survived. They had become whole. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment for part 2. And if you'd like to give an extra boost of support to our creative team, you can also send a super thanks. It helps us continue bringing you stories like this.